One. There we go.
Alrighty, so welcome to my TED Talk. It's very small TEDx. Thank you. Yeah, so we're doing A-Spec Identities, our position in the church, as well as theologies that we tend to resonate with, find comfort with, that kind of thing. Can you guys see? Okay, awesome. I just realized after a second that, like, you might not be able to see this stuff. So, what is A-Spec? A-Spec is an umbrella term for everyone who doesn't experience sexual romantic attraction either at all, or who do experience it, but very rarely, very weakly, or under specific circumstances. So that can include wanting, like, experience attraction but not wanting it reciprocated, experience attraction but only after an emotional connection. I get a crush about annually. They're usually disappointing. So that kind of thing. Most A-Specs don't necessarily ID the same way that what we would call allosexuals or alloromantics do, so those people who experience attraction. So when you say you're gay or you're bi, there's an assumption that you experience romantic and sexual attraction as such. We don't consider that the default. So I identify as androromantic, or andro-gay romantic, asexual. So I'm attracted to men, romantically, but it's rare and weak, and I do not experience sexual attraction. Whereas most people in my social circle would say, like, they're biromantic, bisexual, heteromantic, heterosexual, that kind of thing. There are some people who are aromantic, asexual, but, and they are probably the dominant group, but there is a lot of variations. So when you meet someone who's A-Spec, they're probably going to give you both, because they're not presumed to match in our social circles. So, split attraction model. As I said, there's a ton of different ways you can actually be attracted to someone, and we kind of created this as a way to give words to what we were experiencing and what we think most people are experiencing. Obviously, everyone's unique and special in their own way. So sexual attraction, you want to have sex with someone. Romantic attraction, you want to date someone, you want to be, like, possibly married, cohabitate, all that emotional intimacy. But again, like, where the line is between sexual and romantic can be very different. So some people would say kissing is over the line for romantic attraction. That's insexual. And other people would see it as romantic, or it's both. Super confusing. Aesthetic attraction is something that a lot of A-Specs really enjoy. So that's being attracted to someone, but it's purely aesthetic. It's like looking at a painting or a nice landscape. I don't want to bang a Van Gogh. I don't want to bang you. One Van Gogh. Sexual attraction is a desire to experience them in a sensual sense, but again, not sexually romantic. So, like, you like their voice, you like cuddling them, that kind of thing. So, like, you want to have this physical intimacy, but not sexual and not romantic. And the platonic emotional attraction is an attraction based on personality and other stuff. So that's usually what we would end up calling a platonic partnership. So a lot of people who are aromantic end up in platonic partnerships. So it's very similar to what you would consider a romantic and sexual relationship, but it's entirely platonic, but there's still often cohabitation, sharing resources, emotional intimacy. But again, it's platonic, which is something a lot of people have trouble wrapping their minds around, because they don't see a best friend as the person who's most important in their life. They're supposed to be chasing after the one who is someone they are sexually and romantically attracted to. And then finally, an intellectual attraction, which is just like, you want to talk to this person? Like, they got neat ideas. And that can be anything. And that one's kind of iffy on whether or not it can be rolled into other stuff. So, there's lots of other names for attractions. People often kind of add a label for what they are experiencing, but this is generally the ones people are familiar with and are using. A-Spec identities are fairly new. They only really got going in the 90s, so there's still a lot of stuff that isn't standardized, so to speak. So we're still seeing that in, like, gender identities as well, where there's 8 billion gender identities. Because, like, 30 years from now, it's probably going to settle down to some level of norms, but until then, we're still figuring stuff out. Because we're still figuring stuff out. And we'll get there, but we gotta have that room. So as I mentioned, there's 2 other groups that are very common under A-Spec. So we have grays, which is what I am, which is where you don't experience attraction, or you do experience attraction, but it's in that gray zone between being allo and being ace. So we call them the grays. And it is a pain in the butt to Google search because we spell gray differently in America and Canada. So yeah, it's when attraction is rare, when it is weak, or when it doesn't want to be reciprocated. So you ever have a crush where you're like, I have a crush, and you want to do nothing with it? No? No? None of you? Okay, you kind of nodded. Yeah, that's kind of what your life is. Like, I have a crush. I'm going to do nothing with it. I'm just going to enjoy the crush. Because you don't want to actually do anything with it, because, like, kissing is gross. And then demi is the other one. So that's when there's an emotional attachment that has to be there before attraction can occur. So that can be, you know, for 3 days. You have to know them for 3 years. It's incredibly individual. Everyone has their own thresholds and triggers and what have you. And often a lot of them don't want to tell you what they are because they have, some people have been abused by people trying to game the system. Of like, I have to do these 3 things and then you'll be attracted to me. And that just ruins trust like nobody's business. So these are kind of an extra prefix attached to attraction labels. So like, most people don't say they're just demisexual, they're like bi-demisexual or homo-demisexual or pan-demisexual or something like that. And the same with the grays. So it's just kind of an extra amendum to describe how your attraction manifests, not just like to whom it manifests. So awkward. There's also these 2 kind of attractions that fit under our umbrella. We just don't know where to put them, but they're there. So autocorriso attraction. So autocorriso sexualism was defined quite a few years ago, and it's identityless sexuality. So it's when you can get aroused by other situations, but you have no desire to participate. So you can watch rom-coms and get like really into it, or watch porn, or read smut and be really into it. But the second like you're in there, boom, dies. You have no desire to be involved. So it's really funny because a lot of aces actually read like smut on AO3, and then like, no, I don't want to actually have sex. Like, that's gross. But they can enjoy it from a third person angle, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then altruistic attraction is something that I'm not super familiar with. It's more in the aromantic community. So it's where the attraction types aren't really distinguishable, so you can't, so like platonic attraction and romantic attraction just kind of like exist together, and you can't really, like some people can discern them but feel no desire to, and some people just straight up can't. So someone who they have a very strong emotional attachment to, they also have this romantic potential with, and they've never really found the ability or desire to separate those 2. So this isn't like they're slightly in love with all of their friends, it's more of like the people who they're very, very close to. Again, it's usually platonic and romantic. There is some discussion in the asexual community of romantic and sexual attraction being blurred, but it's pretty much just like platonic and romantic. But people would some people consider its own attraction type, some people think it's a blurring of others, so some people do say they're like bi-altruous or hetero-altruous, because that's another attraction that they are adding into the giant split attraction model that I showed you earlier. So, some funny stats. Pretty much all the research is about asexuality. There's very, very little research on aromanticism. Even the ace census, so like the asexual community has a census every year. It's mostly focused on asexuals because that's their community. There's a lot of overlap, but they're focusing on aces. We were first discovered, for lack of a better word, by Alfred Kinsey. So you may have heard of the Kinsey 0 to Kinsey 6. When he did his survey, he found about 1% of the population didn't fit on his scale because they didn't express attraction to anybody. No fantasies, no dreams, no desires, nothing. So he called them the X category. So some people actually originally called themselves like the X-sexuals and stuff like that because that was where they fit. So they were about 1% of the population. Nowadays, estimates are probably up to about 4%. GLAAD did a survey a couple years ago and found that 4% of 18 to 34-year-olds ID'd as ace, which is a significant increase when you're going from 1 to 4. And that's, again, that's in the US with fairly low awareness of the identity in a lot of communities, so we're probably still going to see this climb a bit more. But again, surveys are kind of difficult because someone who identifies as like an aromantic bisexual isn't necessarily getting counted in our surveys. Or someone who is like demi-bisexual, it might just decide to ID as bi in these surveys, so we're not getting the full picture. The community is overwhelmingly female and non-binary, and even the non-binary people are overwhelmingly AFAB. So, like, there's not a lot of men in most of these communities. It's actually kind of weird to walk into these communities and have almost no men. And a lot of guys are starting up their own communities and stuff like that because they have their own very specific issues that they need to talk about, because, like, guys are often seen as, like, inherently wanting sex, even more so than women. So that's just something that they have to battle with. We're overall very young, so the median age in most communities is in their early 20s. That's going to change as, like, just everyone gets older, but also as awareness gets better. I've run into a number of times where someone has, like, been to Pride and their parents have been like, wait, this is a thing? This describes me! And they're in, like, their 50s. So, like, they're obviously there, just like, you know, back in my great-grandparents' time, there were gay people and bi people. They just suffered in silence, or, like, tried to find their little underground communities that no one talked about. And a lot of us are out completely. A lot of us don't feel safe being out. So a lot of us are out to a partner, or out to immediate family, but aren't out to coworkers, classmates, out to extended family. So, like, my mom knows, but my grandparents don't, kind of thing. And I even have some people in my group who aren't out to spouses. Which is, it's an issue! But, like, they found it after they got married, so they're trying to do this whole, like, am I really ace? Should I tell my partner? Can I live with being in the closet with my partner? Is this going to destroy my marriage? Because, like, honey, I'm not sexually attracted to you, is a deal breaker for most folks. That being said, there are lots of marriages that are very happy with, like, an allosexual partner and an asexual partner. It's just, like, you gotta talk about how much sex you are comfortable with having, if having any. So, discrimination against A-Specs is called aphobia, which actually translates to no fear, which I find hilarious. Yeah, the Greek just did not go well in that. We got, like, queerphobia, makes sense. Homophobia, makes sense. Transphobia, gotcha. Aphobia, wait. So A-Specs are often seen as childish, so, like, basically, once you hit puberty, you're supposed to want sex and dating and all this stuff, which was made middle school confusing for basically all of us. But there's the idea that we're late bloomers or stuff like that, so, like, you know, once we start dating, we'll like it. Which is, yes, we're just seen as, like, immature and childish, and we're also often seen as cold or without empathy, because if you can't, like, you'll never love someone. Spoiler alert, I love lots of people. I sleep with none of them. I date none of them, but I love them. But there's still this idea that, like, this is the ultimate way to express love, and you can't do that. There's something wrong with you. And that's also part of the, like, we're seen as less human, because this is part of what makes us human, instead of, like, making tools, or, I don't know, using the internet, because, like, every species on the planet almost has sex, so, like, I don't know what they're thinking. We're at a very high risk for corrective rape. A lot of people, including, like, LGBT folks, think that we are asexual because we haven't had good sex, or because, like, so, like, and they're more than happy to let us try some of the good stuff. Don't do that. That's bad. Please call that out if you ever see it online of, like, you know, they don't, like, you know, they just need to get a good lay, because, no, we do not. We absolutely do not need a good lay. We're fine. But yeah, corrective rape are some of the highest groups in the queer community, up there with trans women, of that happening, which is not good. And about half of us have seriously considered suicide, because we're brought up believing that we are completely broken, and there's something seriously wrong with us, and we'll never have a happy life or partners or anything like that, which sucks and really screws with your mental well-being. And many mental professionals as well still see asexuality and aromanticism as something that is curable, or something to cure, or as a personal decision. So I myself has had therapists ask me when I decided that I was asexual. Yeah, no, don't do that. So there's this idea that there's a hormone problem, or that, again, you've had a trauma or something like that. The new Diagnostic Statistics Manual does include asexuality as a sexual orientation, but we are still stigmatized in the medical community. So I've had a lot of doctors go like, "What do you mean you're not sexually active at 24?" And it's like, very easily. Like, it's not hard. Like, even though I'm religious, not having sex before marriage isn't exactly like way in a left field idea. Another big issue for us, and this is more just like a social logistics, I guess, is we're at very high risk of getting left behind socially when our friends get married and have kids. So couples often want to hang out with other couples, especially when they have kids. Their entire social life is playdates, and we're just kind of like, oh yeah, we were friends with them back in our single days when we were young and wild and free. And as more and more of our social circle pairs off, or like triples off if you have polyamorous friends, then your social circle just kind of dies. And we're seeing that a lot in folks who are like my age and up. They get more and more socially isolated. They end up hanging out with people who are, like, we end up joining a lot of A-Spec groups if they can, but also the issue is even when they're hanging out with other single people, the other single people are off chasing dates. So like you hang out with like the widows and the divorcees and people who've just like haven't got married yet, but they're still trying. So you're still kind of stuck there being the third wheel in a lot of situations, which sucks a lot. If they're not being aware that they're treating you like that. Like, I've hung out with tons of couples who are totally fine with me being there. Like, you two have never been like, oh yeah, Rowan's here as well, but we're gonna go be coupley. But, but I've definitely been in situations like that, and it's super awkward. Queer platonic partnerships, as I mentioned earlier, often aren't seen as legitimate relationships. It's kind of seen, historically, there was often, many cultures had this idea that you would have same-sex relationships that were like kind of platonic and you could flirt with them, and they were seen as like practice starter relationships for when you really started dating. And this is kind of seen as the same thing of like, well, yeah, it's cute, you have your little friend, but then you'll really start dating. And that's not what happens. A lot of these relationships last for like years, if not lifetimes. Because obviously they fail at a similar rate as romantic and sexual marriages, because we're human, we change, we make mistakes. Celibate marriages are also at risk, because if you haven't had sex, you can be at risk for annulment instead of a divorce. And annulments offer you a lot less protection in legal proceedings than a divorce would, so you don't necessarily get half the property and stuff like that, because annulments are designed for the, we got Vegas married and we want to undo that. Instead of, or like, we got married, but the marriage was invalid because this person lied about who they are, or this person was already married, instead of like, we had a loving marriage for 5 years and then it fell apart and now they're screwing me over because we never had sex. Because I was asexual, not because like, we never cohabitated, or we never like, you know, like, we live on different continents, we were married, we like knew each other for one day and got married, and now we need to get it annulled because we met in Vegas. The queer community is overall very accepting. Like, there's obviously jerks, but a lot of queer groups do struggle to provide services and counseling to us. So the Calgary Aces and Arrows have been referred a number of people because they've come to like some kind of queer organization, and the queer organization is all, you can love any gender you want, and we're all going, that's great, not my problem. Because like, that's not what we're struggling with. Like, most of us are very supportive of the rest of the queer community, but we have very different counseling needs and lifestyle needs that need to be supported in their own way. But there are people in the queer community that do dislike A-Specs for the fact that we are straight passing, because we're not in a same-sex relationship. So it's kind of similar to the flack that a lot of like bisexuals get when they're in a different gender relationship, because you're not in a same gender relationship, so you're not really oppressed right now. Completely ignoring the fact that like, I get so much flack for being single, or like, not me specifically, but aces as a whole get a lot of flack for being single from some people. So like, anyone who complains about like your grandma's constantly asking you like, oh, when are you getting a boyfriend and when are you having grandkids? Yeah, it's that, but like for your entire life, and you don't actually want to get married or have grandkids, so there's not even like this like, I'll get around to it. We're just like, nah, that sounds awful. It's like my grandparents asking me when I'm going to jump out of a plane without a parachute.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, I'm not going to jump out of a plane without a parachute. I'm also probably never gonna get laid. It works out. I love murdering my audience. The interrobang didn't render. I'm so mad. That's an interrobang. Because I felt it correctly encapsulated the church's approach to sex. I'm like, what? So, growing up in the church, especially like fundamentalist and evangelical churches, there's a lot of pressure to resist the temptation of sex. And most aces, up till they turn 18, are like, we're nailing this! Why is everyone else finding this so hard? And then also have like, is there something wrong with me? Because everyone else finds this so hard. But like, when we were doing the abstinence stuff, I was like, why is everyone freaking out about this? Who wants to do this? This sounds weird. Should have known. Someone should have told me aside and been like, you might be ace. But the thing is that we're all sitting there going like, hey, this is easy, but then when we get married, that switch isn't flipped. Like, we're suddenly not going like, oh, now I want to bang, because that's not how biology works. Despite what many pastors would like. Parents also sometimes think that, like, since they aren't catching their kid trying to sneak around, their kid must just be very, very good at sneaking around, so then double down the restrictions. Because, like, I've never caught my kid with porn. Like, obviously they must be hiding it better. Because, like, no kid isn't trying to sneak around in their teens. Obviously. Yeah, no, apparently some of us aren't. News. So, like, obviously there are some aces that do have sex and do masturbate because, like, sex can be fun even if you aren't attracted to your partner. Or because, like, you like making your partner happy more than you find sex gross. And stuff like that, or whatever, but like, yeah, it's not really a thing much in the ace community. That being said, like, even in progressive churches, sex is very much seen as this gift from God, so like, it's part of what makes your marriage stronger, and it makes you happy, and like, gives you good hormones, or whatever. So even in progressive churches, there's still this pressure that like, sex is a good thing that you should be having within these limited, like, within this box. And we're kind of sitting here going like, okay, but like, God made all these other things. I hate Brussels sprouts. God created those. Like, many gifts from God. I don't need to partake in all of them.
Maybe you haven't eaten the right Brussels sprouts.
I love you. Gabe, you'll just have to come over and prepare me some very good Brussels sprouts sometime. That being said, in less
Because of it just turned off.
Okay. Yeah, so like there's tons of creepiness around, like, you know, women don't really want sex, their husbands want sex, that a lot of ace women are like denied the potential to have a sexuality or told that being asexual is normal because misogyny is awful! Oh my god! The stuff we teach our kids. And many people put pressure, or many churches, and people in churches, put pressure on people to get married and have kids because that is seen as like the foundation of a church. So sitting there as single McSingledom for your entire life can often make you feel very excluded from church life because, you know, they do couples events and singles events and like singles events for like 25-year-olds and down. So like once you start aging out of like the young adults group, being single is seen as this massive anomaly. Because why aren't you paired up? Why don't you have kids? Like, even if you're like, but like my dad has this issue as well, because he's a divorcee in his 60s. And there's like no one else in his age group hanging out with him. They're all couples, so he just third wheels a lot. Because like, there's no other single people around, especially in smaller churches. So, A-Specs in the church. What is us? a lot of Christians, when they hear about A-Spec, automatically jump to celibacy, especially those in like Catholic traditions and other traditions that have a celibate clergy or a celibate like nuns or what have you. Celibacy is not A-Spec. Celibacy is supposed to be like fasting. You're giving up something in your life that you want, that you're giving it up to put something else in its place. So like prayer or good works or something else. Many demisexuals and other A-Specs are kind of like fetishized by the church because they're seen as this, like it's the ideal. You don't want to have sex until you've hit like the point in your relationship where it's appropriate for you to have sex. And many people see that as marriage when it's not marriage, but people see that as marriage. A-Spec identities as a whole are also kind of like fetishized for not wanting sex. Like we're seen as pure and we don't have to deal with the sin of lust. I mean, spoilers, I just have lots of other sins. Like, there's no, like, it's like, knock that one off, cool, we're done. Like, yeah, it's like, oh, you don't have to deal with, like sexual sin. It's like, yeah, still have greed, still have hate, anger, like, I got tons of other crap that I have sinned around other than sex. So, like, don't worry, my quota's there. And that often also falls apart when they realize that we aren't working towards typical relationships. So someone can be like, oh man, that's great, like you don't want to do, like, you know, that you're like keeping yourself pure or whatever, you're like not, you know, you're focusing on other things, but it's always seen as a temporary thing. Once they realize that like lifetime, I'm not even trying to get married, it all kind of falls apart. Because like I've had people even in my church that are like, oh man, it's like, you know, sexual attraction, that's cool, but you still want like date, right? And it's like, no, not really, because they can't imagine a life where you're not trying to find someone. Like the whole wanting kids thing is kind of, you know, that's getting into more acceptability, but like just not like wanting to be single your entire life is just so radically out there for most people, and I get why they're doing it. Most of them like are in these great relationships, and especially in my age group are still in that honeymoon phase. They want me to have that happiness, but they don't realize that I wouldn't be happy in that situation. It's again, they're serving their dream meal of Brussels sprouts, and I'm sitting here going like, cool, we're ordering pizza. Because like, yeah, we have very different things that we want in life at a rather fundamental level, and it takes a lot to wrap your head around that, because there's still people who are going like, oh, but like he's cute, and I'm like, okay, sure, aesthetically, I guess, yeah, okay, because like they're not used to me having this. They're used to having this always on sexuality. Even if they're in a relationship, there's still this kind of like in the back of your brain, you're kind of going like, they're cute, they're cute, they're cute, they're not, they're cute, they're cute, and I'm just kind of like, that's a person, definitely a person. Because I just don't have that like ping off of people that a lot of sexuals do. So us in theology, while we aren't celibate, a lot of us do borrow some of that idea. So we do, many of us do feel that we are taking energy that we would otherwise be putting into sex and relationships if we were allosexual and alloromantic, and we are putting it somewhere else. So we're putting that into personal development, we're putting that into platonic relationships, we're putting that into good works, prayer, whatever you, what have you, like obviously very individual. Others see A-Specs as parts of the community that can offer objective views on relationships. Almost every A-Spec I know ends up being the agony aunt to their friends on relationships. I don't know why. Because it's like, I'm going to ask the person who has never dated or been laid about my relationship problems, but they keep doing it. So I guess there's this idea that we don't have skin in the game in regards to relationships. So we don't have our own personal like history coming out or biases. We're just kind of like able to view it objectively. I don't know how accurate that is, but that seems to be what a lot of people around us view. Another thing is that we feel that we are adding to the conversation around intimacy as a whole. People often forget that there are other ways you can be intimate with someone, there's other ways you can be affectionate with someone, and there's other people you should probably be affectionate with than like a sexual and romantic relationship, and like a primary sexual, like, and having that person be like at the center of your world, the most important person in your life, and like all other people excluded from that, because that's something we often experience. So like, there is very much an idea in a lot of society that like your partner is the most important person in your life, and like your best friend of 20 years is suddenly less important. And we're kind of sitting here going like, no, but also there's lots of other ways to be intimate. You can wash someone's hair, you can give someone a gift, you can like let them cry on your shoulder. There's so many other ways that you can be intimate with someone, that you can share affection with someone, that aren't sexually romantic. They can be sexually romantic if you make them, but like the activity in and of itself isn't. And also, like, again, that priority on diversifying where you put your attentions, because it's really easy for a lot of people to just like go all in on their relationship, and we see this a lot in like older men when their wife dies or their wife leaves them, that are just like at massive risk for like mental health problems and suicide and all kinds of stuff, because they have literally let their entire social circle atrophy except for their wife. And when that support's gone, they have nothing. And it is really bad for you. Like, I cannot tell you how bad it is for you to do that. So like, we as a society do need to talk about the fact that like everyone seems to think their spouse is the most important person in their life, when it doesn't necessarily have to be that, or even be in that conversation of like, there doesn't have to be a most important person in your life. Like, it's fine. So there's a little bit of like relationship anarchy in there, just a smidge. So seeing ourselves in scripture, most A-Specs see themselves in a lot of the conversations that are pointed towards marginalized people or diasporas, just like I think most of the queer community is. Many people of color are, just because it's like, to the persecuted, and we're like, yeah, that's me! But like, very specifically, there's a couple of verses that we often pick out, so to speak. So in Matthew, Jesus says, some are born as eunuchs, some are made eunuchs by others, some choose not to marry for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. We're kind of going with the like, yeah, that's us, first one, sup. Or kind of the second, like we're kind of 1 and 3. Of like, yeah, we're not, we have other energies, we're fine. We're not, like, not everyone has to get married. It's cool, Jesus said so. That being said, and I gotta pull this up, I was playing around with translations, because that's what you gotta do. And in the Message, it says, not everyone is mature enough to live a married life. So like, right in there, in the Message is like, immature people don't get married. And like, we're all kind of going like, cool, fight me. Because we're adults. Like, that being said, it actually does go on and say, some from birth seemingly never give marriage a thought, and like, that definitely describes a lot of us. But it opens up with, if you're capable of growing into the largeness of marriage, and it's like, no! No, I'm fully fine on my own, thank you. I'm a very mature adult. I mean, like, you can't tell from my Twitter feed, but I'm a very mature adult. And then in Paul, it's, I wish everyone were single just as I am. It's better to stay unmarried, just because, like, yeah, that's where you're putting your energy. You're putting your energy into the church, you're putting your energy into the community, you're putting your energy into the kingdom of God. And many A-Specs, especially, read Jesus and Paul as A-Spec themselves sometimes, especially Paul. Because he's literally in there going like, it's better to stay unmarried like me. Because those people who burn with lust need to get married. But if you don't, like me, and I can't imagine why someone would want to have sex. And we're kind of sitting, and like a bunch of us are going like, is Paul ace? Because I feel like I wrote this. like, give me like a little bit more pomp in my writing, and then like I could write this. Like, yeah, all those people who want to burn with lust, I don't get it, but like they have to have sex, go get married. I have better things to do. But like, we often see ourselves in a lot of stories about people in the Bible who, and in the church as a whole, like church history, who didn't get married. It's really hard to prove someone's A-Spec just because of, like, you can't really prove the absence of something, as opposed to proving, like, a monk was gay, because, like, we caught him sneaking out of another monk's quarters at 2 in the morning, probably gay. Really hard to prove A-Spec. But we see ourselves in a lot of the, like, history of the church, where you have people who have, like, run away because they were going to get, like, so it was like, you know, their dad was going to force them to get married, so they ran away to the nunnery or whatever, and we're kind of going like, mood. Yeah, the other A-Spec in the room gets it. So, anyone have questions? Concerns? Funny jokes? Shoot, yeah, turn it off.